Good evening, everyone. My name is Eve Warburton. I'm the Director of the Indonesia Institute, and I'm also a Research Fellow at the Department of Political and Social Change. And it's a huge honour and a pleasure to be moderating this Q&A session with Dr. Baswedan. Let me begin by, first of all, thanking you very much for an incredibly detailed, thorough and insightful and fascinating lecture on the mechanics of delivering programs at the Jakarta government level. So this part of our lecture will be structured mainly around inviting you all to ask your questions to Dr. Baswedan. He's been very generous in allowing us plenty of time to engage with the audience. I might begin by starting things off, and then while you guys all sort of think of your questions, and I would emphasise that you please think of very brief, succinct questions, because we have a very large audience tonight, and I'll invite you to just ask one question. So while you're thinking of your questions, I might start. Dr. Baswedan, it was a fascinating talk, and it was very focused on the technocratic aspects of delivering campaign promises. But the title of your talk did involve the word democracy. So what I might ask you is how democratic institutions at the Jakarta level, things like rights protections, things like checks on accountability, the things that we normally associate with democratic government. How did you manage, protect and support those sorts of institutions during your tenure, and how important were they for delivering the sorts of programs that you've outlined here tonight?
Sure, thank you, Eve. Yes, indeed. I mean, democracy is not only about election, but also about upholding values. And those values include, some of them, respect for freedom of expressions, and then two, transparency, for example, accountability. So some of those values, and we tried our best to uphold that. And to give you example, the freedom of expressions. Being in government in Jakarta is always noisy situations, whoever is the governor, because the social media engagement is very high. All media are in Jakarta, so small things could be trending topics if it happens in Jakarta. And it could attract attentions across Indonesia. And having that is a true benefit to us. What happened is we are able to get quick response from the general public about what we're doing. So we don't see this as a problem, but we are seeing this as an opportunity to get things better, to improve things by having public engagement on everything that we're doing. It could come out in form of criticism, but for us in democracy, criticism is normal and should be respected. And in fact, we benefited from that. So freedom of expression is there. And one indication is this. We never prosecute anyone or report anyone to the police or anything about whatever they're saying to the government of Jakarta or to the governor of Jakarta. We treated this as respect to freedom of expression. And then number two is creating an environment of peacefulness and respect to all groups in our society. And that is also something that we seriously focus on, ensuring that all groups in Jakarta were given equal opportunity, were given equal treatment as part of our value to democracy. And we're happy to report that Democratic Index of Jakarta has always been first in the country, beginning in 2018 and so forth. So even when there is an objective measurement about our democracy, we serve as one of the highest in Indonesia. And I do think that having transparency, having public engagement is key. And if I may share some of our approach, what is called collaborations. We even label our city, Jakarta, a city of collaborations. The reason was simple. I used to be outside government, and I'd like to help government. But often, government don't want our help. I mean, when we started Indonesia Mengajar, I come to Kabupaten, and the Kabupaten said, no, we don't want you. We're able to handle this. They were seeing us more like someone who may be disturbing the process as a disturbance. And on the other hand, when I enter government, I'm seeing from within that what we have in government is authority, resources, but what we're lack of is innovations, creativity, network, grounded experience. Many of us didn't have that. And Jakarta is the city where, best talents were there. There is no other city in Indonesia that have private sector as many as Jakarta. Think tanks as many as Jakarta. University as many as Jakarta. Or NGOs as many as Jakarta. Why should we in government do everything on our own? Why don't we invite them to join and work together? And this is, again, the principle of democracy. So I mentioned earlier about the reform on transportations. In fact, we are inviting NGOs, think tanks from Jakarta as well as from international to work together with us. So many of the reform that we're doing, the idea didn't come directly from us, but from our partners. And when they're involved, they are also seeing what we're doing. They're also monitoring what the bureaucracy is doing. And they're giving feedbacks. Things that they didn't like, things that they criticize, it's things that is not right, they report it to us. And yes, it requires extra energy, but at the end, we improve the quality of governance and the delivery of that process.
Thank you very much, Pak. Okay, so questions from the audience. I've got Nava here, Hal Hill, and the gentleman there at the back with the shirt on there. So that's three, and we'll take three at once if we can. So one microphone. Nava, one up here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pak Anies, for the presentation. My name is Nava. I'm a PhD student here. Over the course of my fieldwork, I was researching about Islamist groups, alumni of the 212 movement, and especially the women activists. And, I got all the updates about all your achievements from my respondents. And so they are some of your biggest fans. So, when I asked them, why do you work so hard for Pak Anies campaign? Because they are volunteers for, Sobat Anies. They really work laboriously day and night, unpaid, for the success of your campaign. And when I asked them, what do you hope from Pak Anies? And they said, first, they want clean governance, and then they also believe that you would impose a kind of Islamic orthodoxy and Sharia-based moral values. To what extent, and how would you translate those demands into your policies? Thank you.
Just an easy one to start. Yes, and then Hal Hill. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Budi. I came all the way from Jogja, Mas. I want to be straightforward. So this is in relation to next year, yeah, when the only person now being endorsed by Pak Surya Paloh. So yesterday, Pak Prabowo met with Pak Surya Paloh, and the press conference, Pak Surya Paloh mentioned, of course, we need to be polite and still working together for future Indonesia. But Pak Prabowo said that if Anies running for president, this is Pak Prabowo words yesterday, okay, I'm willing to fight against him. So my question, would you be willing to fight against him in the next election, Pak? Thank you.
And Professor Hal Hill, yes, please.
Pak Anies, selamat datang. Very nice to see you again. Thank you for your interesting talk. By the way, I think you're being too modest. Your city is 11 million people, but as I understand it, it doubles to the Australian population size during the day. So you've got an even bigger job than you talked about. So let me, if I may ask you an economics question, since I first met you as an economics student at Gadjah Mada. So, and your prospective career looking forward. So the Indonesian economy has done quite well during the democratic era, last 25 years. And I'd argue, I think a lot of people argue also, that one of the reasons is that the key economics positions have been sort of insulated or outside the political process. That is, the two key posts, Menteri Keuangan and Bank Indonesia Governor, have typically been technocratic people, exemplified currently by Ibu Sri Mulyani and Pak Peri Warjo. So that seems to be a crucial part of the Indonesian political economy construct in the democratic era. Looking forward, would that be your intention to keep that kind of tradition going? Thank you very much and welcome again.
It's up to you. So 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So Islamists, Pak Prabowo, and the economy, 2024. You have 5 minutes.
This is so Canberra. It was quiet. When Pak Anil Kumar, thanks for coming. Usually, quiet audience like this is in Singapore, Pak. Okay, but it was quiet here. Anyway, the first questions with regard to aspirations. I've received many aspirations, and when I'm working as governors, then I have few principles that I uphold when making decision. What are the first one? First is justice to all, the principle of justice. Number 2, common sense has to be there. Okay. Number 3 is public interest. And number 4 is rules and regulations and undang-undang. Okay. So I didn't work the other way around, Pak. Because most of us in government will be working their way around. Number 1 is following rules and regulations, but sometimes they're not making sense. Okay? And sometimes they're not in the public interest. And sometimes it doesn't reflect the principle of justice. So, our approach has been like that. So, principle of justice, and then common sense, akal sehat, and then public interest, and then rules and regulations. So with that, I believe that's the very principles of Islam too. It's justice. So that has been our approach. And if you are witnessing Jakarta in the past 5 years, we try to always ensure that 4 principle is being adopted. So it's not specifically only for a certain religious group, but also to all. And that has been the approach. And I like to carry on that approach toward the future. Second questions. I think I really need to listen to the quote, Pak. But would you be willing to fight against Pak Prabowo? That was the questions, right? What do you think, Pak? If I may address, I think toward the future of Indonesia, we'll see who will be on the tickets. We don't know yet. And I myself, if I were asked 6 months ago, I never expected the nomination come that early. I always thought that presidential nominations would perhaps start around May and June this year. That was, my thinking. And that's why after I finish my term in October, I like to take a break, perhaps sabbatical, and do a little bit of work before election cycles. And I wasn't sure which directions I will be going. I may be going for re-election for Jakarta, which is also next year. But it can also be a national elections. And I was always being frank. I wasn't sure. Why? Because I'm not the leader of a political party. I cannot nominate myself through political parties. For the gubernatorial elections, non-partisan candidate is possible. But for the presidential elections, there is no non-partisan candidate. So it has to be nominated by political party. However, we know that Nasdem nominated in October, and then last month PKS, and then Democrats. So here I am, non-partisan person nominated by 3 political party, and yet some party leaders have not yet getting nomination. in terms of minimum 20%. So I think toward the futures, you have to be ready to sort of compete with anyone and present your idea, present your records, and let the public of Indonesia decide which one they're going to take. Pak Holhil, same approach, Pak, that I've been doing in Jakarta. And that's why I often ask the general public to not only ask what will you be doing in the future, because you can provide any answer with regard to futures, because it's not happening yet. But I would suggest to all of us here, whenever you ask questions, ask what have you been doing, what have you done in the past on similar case. I entered Jakarta as an elected governor, and then you have leaders of departments, agencies, bodies, CEOs of state-owned enterprises. I did assessment to their performance. If they are performing well, then no replacement were needed. They can continue the job. And many of our directors were appointed by my predecessors, and they're still doing their job until today. The reason is because they delivered. So the approach when it comes to government, you have to really give values to technocracy over politics. Now, where is the political components? The political components is on the agenda that needs to be delivered. Those are the promise that needs to be delivered. So you may be the head of the transportation department, and you have been doing more of managing private vehicles. New governors come in and saying you have to manage public transportation now. You deliver it, but this is the content. This is the political agenda that you need to deliver. But who delivers it? The technocrats. And so that was something that I have adopted in the past, and I think we will value that in the future. And on the other hand, when it comes to cabinet ministries, there are portions which political parties would like to have their candidates and their people to be in. And I think that's a reality of politics everywhere. What is important for the leadership is to have clear vision, translate it into clear agenda, translate it into clear KPIs, and then have a unit that is doing the monitoring of the execution. So the individuals could come from anywhere, but if you don't have that delivery units that monitor that, many of those promises, many of those vision agenda could be lost on the way. Now, Indonesia benefited from the fact that we have technocrats in the ministerial posts. However, that doesn't guarantee you that they will be doing what the leaders wanted to do. They will not be partisan, but that doesn't mean non-partisanship is according to the agenda of the leaders. So I think this is two different things, but having the technocrat is good, but having clear agenda, clear priorities, and clear KPIs is as important. Otherwise, non-partisanship could go on their own way, not in the way that the leaders is envisioning. Begitu Pak Holhil. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much. We are actually on time at 7 o'clock.
I'm okay, yeah.
You're okay. If anyone does need to leave, that's fine. But Pak Anies has been very generous and is happy just to go a little bit over time because we're running a bit late. So other questions, if we could keep them super, super brief. This gentleman here was so fast, I have to give him the microphone. Pak Terry over here, and then we'll see how we go for time. Silakan Pak. Silakan Mas. Silakan Mas.
Thank you, Dr. Baswedan. My name is Teguh. I'm currently studying strategic studies. I'd like to ask a question that is perhaps a bit early. It's also in regards to 2024. As you are one of the possible candidates for the running election at 2024, can I please get some of your thoughts on Indonesia's defense policy, because if you will be running for 2024, I'd like to know how your views on Indonesia's defense policy will be. Thank you.
One is asking whether I'm challenging. Two is asking what's the Indonesian defense policy. Same person actually referred to. All right.
We might just take one more together,
Sure.
Pak Anies, and then we'll, yes.
Hello, Pak Anies. Thank you very much for the review of how you ran Jakarta according to your election promises. But one thing you didn't deal with in election promises was COVID. Could you tell us how you dealt with what was probably the biggest blow to Jakarta's public health in many years with COVID?
His name is again?
That's Terry Hall.
Pak Terry. Siap. Okay, first questions with regard to security. In fact, in the past 2 days, I've been discussing so many balance of power issues in the region. But overall, I could not go on to detail at this point, but we'd like to see our defense capacity able to maintain territorial integrity of Indonesia, and especially in places where potential frictions can take place, such as South China Sea. So we'd like to have our capacity enough to ensure territorial integrity. Number two, Pak Terry, terima kasih. COVID is something that, yes, we didn't predict. And I must say it was one of the deepest leadership learning experience is when we deal with COVID. And we work immediately with scholars. So if I may say, our approach in Jakarta in dealing with COVID was this. I involved in international mayors associations like C40s. So in early January on 2020, early February, mayors were having meetings. I involved in those meetings. During those meetings, they were sharing stories about the severity of the problems in their cities. So mayors of Seoul, mayors of Tehran, Milan, some of these mayors were sharing to us the difficulties they're having. And we learned that early. And then we started to have task force. We established a task force before the national government established a task force. And we had meetings with the immigration services, with the intelligence, with the travel bureau, inviting them. We're trying to evaluate how many people were coming from China at that time. This is the month of January and February. And we start reporting our testing result to the national government, to the Ministry of Health. And this was a situation where we have to decide how to go in handling this crisis. And we thought the key word to handle this is trust. We have to have the trust of the public to government, because the epidemiologists were telling us it's not going to be short. It can be a year, it can be 2 years, it can be longer than that. We didn't know that. So number one that is important, public need to trust us in government. And that is our principles. So in order to gain trust, we are being transparent. We are telling exactly what is happening to the public. We are telling exactly what they need to do because we would like to manage that trust. And trust, there's 3 components to that. One is you need to send a message that you're competent. Number 2, you have to have integrity. Transparency is key component to integrity. And number 3, you have to be intimate to the problem. Intimacy is key. So that was our approach. And often when we adopt that principle, we are not always in line with the approach of the national health policy. especially with the Ministry of Health. Give you one example. We send samples of our patients in hospitals to the Ministry of Health, and they always come back, they never come back to us. So we didn't know whether this is positive or negative. We have sent quite a few, more than 200, I believe, by early March. So I decided in March 1st to go public saying we have submitted PDP at that time to the Ministry of Health, but we are not receiving response. And the Minister of Health was responding in a negative way, saying that there is no case at all. A day later, it was announced the first 2 cases of COVID at that time. And then Jakarta government is the only government that manages funeral services and cemetery. Average funeral services for the past 2 years, so 2018, 2019, monthly average is 2,700 services. In the month of March, jumped to 4,300, right? And the month of April, it reached 4,500. This is no small numbers in terms of funeral services. Something must have gone wrong. And then we're looking at the bills in the hospitals. The pneumonia bills doubled. Something must have been wrong. And we're in the situation in which, on the one hand, you're listening to mayors across the globe saying there is a problem. On the other hand, we're talking to the Ministry of Health, who are trying to isolate this problem and say, you know, this is not a big deal. And then you're talking to the general publics who are worrisome. And that was the time that we decide we will go public, we will create our own policies and move forward with bold policies on protecting our citizens. We may not be popular, but I told our team, let's not worry about what people write about us today, what the social media says about us. Let's worry about what historian will be writing about us in the future, because that's what matters. So that's the approach. And I'm glad that a year later, our policy and the national government policy is synchronized. But it takes a few months for that approach, to a synchronized approach to happen.